Welcome back to day 2 of the Western Bringing the Farm to School Regional Facilitators Workshop. We hope you enjoyed the day yesterday, and we are really looking forward to diving deeper into the trainer's toolkit over the next 3 days. As we start off for day 2 together, we want to just to come off mute when you're able to share any kind of thoughts, questions, any ideas, anything that's going on for you. We would just love to learn and get your feedback on the coverage that we're doing over the next 3 days. So yeah, just as you're comfortable, feel free to engage however you see fit. Before we start off for today, just wanted to just ask a question, and feel free to utilize the chat as well as to come off mute. But wanted to ask, what are you most interested in learning about today or discussing with your team? So if we could just take a quick moment to chime in and answer the question, and then we'll move on for the day. Yeah, feel free to come up mute or use the chat box.
I'll come off mute to have somebody come off mute. I think I'd be most interested. I'm Gwen Vernon from Tilth Alliance in Washington State. Most interested in discussing further with the Washington State team, just kind of continuing some of the conversations we had yesterday of where they're, who else should be invited to the team, or how we can put something on together for training.
Great. Thank you so much, Gwen. And just to ask, how did you hear about the training?
From the Washington State coordinator, Chris Iverly.
Excellent, excellent. Well, thank you so much. We really appreciate your presence here. All right. Well, yeah, feel free to share your thoughts in the chat as we move on. And of course, we'll have some more time throughout the day to really just engage with you all. So thank you so much. Yeah, before we get started, this is just a reminder that your participant home-based document has all the links you'll need to follow along with us, including links to the Jamboards, the website, which is now up and running, and digital versions of the trainer's toolkit, as well as the workshop agenda for this week. So if you have any trouble finding anything, just let us know. We can help you get directed. Today, we'll be focusing on just a deep dive into the producer curriculum, specifically within the introduction portion, as well as Module 1 and Module 2. So throughout the day, you'll have the opportunity to work within your state breakout groups and explore ideas for curriculum building, as well as thinking more in-depthly about the local producer trainings that will happen in your areas. So yeah, we would just like to remind you all that the implementation of the trainings may look different from state to state and training to training. As we talked about yesterday, many of you may take on the form of a standalone training. Many may pull pieces of the Bringing the Farm to School training to enhance another producer-facing event. So we just want to highlight and uplift the different ways the curriculum is flexible and can adapt to different formats and approaches. So before we review each module, I'd like to orient you all to how we'll be approaching the module overview. For each producer curriculum module, we'll be walking through the content section by section, and in some cases slide by slide, to familiarize you all with the content of the modules and to help you just envision and plan for presenting the curriculum materials yourself. We encourage you to follow along in both the facilitator guide and your producer workbook, and we'll give you the page references throughout to help you just stay on track with us. As we move through the modules, we'll be pointing out activities and opportunities for local customization and facilitator tips for you to think about when you're presenting to producers. So on that note, I'm going to actually turn it over to Tammy to get us started with the producer curriculum overview. Take it away, Tammy.
Yeah, and actually, Lacey was able to join us. That's where we were a little bit delayed because we didn't want to start without Lacey, and she was having some computer problems. So she's able to do the curriculum map and training module outline overview. So take it away, Lacey.
Thanks, Tammy. And my apologies to everyone. It just never fails to be the perfect timing for a total computer freakout, but I'm here and I'm connected and ready to get started. So thank you for your patience with me. But I wanted to get started by sharing a little bit about some really valuable tools that are going to hopefully help kind of keep you oriented as we move through the curriculum over the next 2 days, and also be a really great reference point for you as you leave these trainings and start to think about what's next for you and working with your state groups or with your organizations. So what we're going to be covering in just the next couple of minutes to help orient you to the day are the training module outlines or curriculum maps. And so these are going to be really valuable tools, as I mentioned, both to kind of keep you as a reference point today. So I'd recommend as we go through these sessions today, you kind of continue to go through and see how they're outlined within these maps. And then there'll also be tools as you go home and start thinking about what pieces of these curriculum materials you'll want to bring to a producer training. These are super helpful tools. So as we talked about yesterday, there may be specific areas, questions, most priority areas of training that you want to bring in. And these curriculum maps or training module outlines will be a great place to identify and uplift those priority areas as you plan. So to get you oriented here, we are going to be looking at the training module outlines for facilitators. Those start in your facilitator guide. So our yellow binder here on page 11. So I'd encourage you to flip to that page right now where you'll see a similar view of what you see on the screen here. There are also parallel versions of this resource on the producer handbook, just what the producers will need to know. And those are at the beginning of each outline in the producer handbook. So you can see here what these different training module outlines look like. And if you could flip to the next slide, Tammy, we'll talk a little bit about what you'll find within each of these training module outlines. So within each training module outline, you will see the training topic and duration. See in that far column on the left side. And if you click through, Tammy, it'll highlight these different sections. And that will list each section of the module and the estimated time. And that's, of course, to help you plan your training and get that estimated time. You'll also see in that next column the learning objectives for each section. So what will producers know or be able to do following that section? That's a great resource. Again, if you have those specific areas of focus that you want to come back to, those are a great place to kind of reference those key questions and learning objectives. That next column over, we have the content and core concepts. So that general outline of all of the content covered in that section. And then finally, in that final column, we have a full list of the training activities and materials. So you see the list of producer training slide decks. You see the list of suggested activities and the time it will take to do each of those activities. It has a list of all of the written and podcast and video case studies, as well as the worksheet. So all of those different integrated interactive components of each of the sections. You can go to the next slide, please, Tammy. So this is, again, an example of the producer version of the curriculum map. And so that's going to show really what the producers will need to know. So the basic learning objectives, what will they be taking away from this section, the overview of the modules to help orient and guide them through the sections, and then the learning materials. So what worksheets will they use, what case studies are going to be most helpful and pertinent to these areas of discussion through the curriculum. Next slide, please. So over the next 2 days, we are going to be going in depth on these sections, but I'll just kind of briefly give you an overview of the different modules and the content within each. And I encourage you to follow along, again, starting on page 11. That's where you'll see the introduction, the power of farm to school, which Jenny Lee is going to discuss with us next. And you see there's one primary section there focused on the learning objectives for the power of farm to school. Next slide, please, Tammy. And then we'll see module 1, which I'll be covering here shortly. And we have 3 sections in module 1, including an optional content section. So we'll dig into child nutrition programs, local food sourcing, and then I'll briefly share with you those optional sections around child and adult care food program and the summer food service program. On the next slide, you'll see the outline for Module 2, which we'll hear about later this afternoon, which builds on that content and concepts in Module 1 to really dig into selling to school markets. And in that, we see 2 sections, one around the farm to school market channels, and then one around selling to school districts. On the next slide, we move into Module 3, which we will be hearing about tomorrow morning. And this is where we can really dig into the right product to sell to schools. So again, building off the content in Module 1, 2, but really bringing it back to choosing the right product. And in that area, we'll cover choosing the right product as well as product development. And then finally, tomorrow afternoon, we'll dive into Module 4, which is really kind of an extensive dive into growing for schools with information around business planning, scaling up production, crop planning, information for livestock production planning, and a little bit around food safety as well, and navigating food safety standards. And then it all comes together. We wrap up and we'll review this content tomorrow afternoon with the conclusion that kind of brings all of those pieces together for producers. So again, can recommend that you continue to kind of reference back to orient yourself, because we will be going into a lot of information, and it's really helpful to have this kind of outline to follow along and even make notes. This is a great place to kind of make notes around what might be helpful. We all have our little tabs here to keep coming back to them. So recommend that you use this as a reference point as we move forward. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jenny Lee to get us started with the introduction.
Great, thank you, Tammy. Yeah, so we're going to be spending the next 30 minutes or so walking through the content found in the introduction module. And this, we're going to be looking at both the facilitator guide and the producer workbook. So we're going to be going back and forth between these 2 resources and following along with the slides that are visible as thumbnails in the facilitator guide. They're also accessible online. Those slides are. I'm going to be referencing where we are in each resource by including visual cues, kind of like you see right here. The slide image shown here shows you what slide we're looking at in the facilitator guide. We'll also be using lots of page numbers and references throughout. And if at any point you can't find where we're at, or you need something repeated, please just feel free to drop your question or comment in the chat, and we'll make sure to get you where you need to be. So again, the image in the top right corner is that first slide of the introduction slide deck, and you're going to see that matching thumbnail of this slide on page 19 of the facilitator guide. So let's just make sure we're all in the same place to get started. So we're on page 18 of the facilitator guide, which comes just after those training module outlines that Lacey just went over. And we're on page 2 of the producer workbook. Okay, so again, I encourage that everyone has both resources open and follow along with these side by side. That's going to give you the best sense of how the training flows, how these resources work together. And if you don't have hard copies or just prefer to follow along online, we do have those digital versions accessible on our website, which I believe Tammy's going to drop that link in the chat for you to navigate to if needed. All right, so let's start looking at the facilitator guide. So each module starts with an about section, and it's followed by that module, a smaller version of that module curriculum outline, as well as any background info, including those core concepts, digging deeper resources, case studies that are going to appear in the module, as well as key terms for that module. And this info at the beginning of each module is really intended to be a snapshot of what you're going to need in the module for those planning purposes. And then in the producer workbook, you're going to see an even more streamlined version of this. So basically just the curriculum outline directly followed by content. Okay. So we're going to look just a little bit more closely at the curriculum outline that Lacey took us through just a minute ago. Again, this is on page 18 of the facilitator guide, with that simplified version on page 2 of the producer workbook. So for the introduction specifically, content and core concepts are focused on introducing farm to school to producers and really setting the stage for understanding, both the demand for local food and school meals, as well as those benefits for producers in selling to school markets. So a big part of the introduction is providing an opportunity for seasoned and experienced producers to share their success stories with Farm to School. So building in those peer learning opportunities. And we're going to talk about this a little bit more later, but this is really where customization of the module comes in. This is where you come in, bringing in those local producers in your state doing this work to share their stories. So that's a really important part of the introduction and getting producers in the room hooked into Farm to School. And this module also introduces the concept of how producers can use goal setting and action planning to support their efforts in selling to schools. So you'll see in the far right column, materials needed include those farm to school success stories with local producers, as well as the school business action planning guide, which you'll find in the back of the producer workbook. And we're going to dig into that more at the end of the introduction. So we estimate about 30 to 45 minutes for the introduction, but that length of time really depends on how many local producers success stories you highlight in this section and how much time you spend with producers familiarizing themselves with the school business action planning guide. All right, so under the curriculum map on page 18 of the facilitator guide, you're going to see that background info. Core concepts are listed first, and if you need a refresher for any of the core concepts for any module, you're going to want to look right below that and check out the Digging Deeper into Core Concepts resources. So we've included a short list of resources to support you in preparing for delivering this content. So can folks give a thumbs up if they're seeing those Digging Deeper into Core Concept resources listed at the bottom of page 18? I see some thumbs. For the ones that I can see, I see some thumbs, so good. And so you can see here, those can be accessed either by clicking the hyperlink if viewing digitally, right? So if you're looking at it digitally, you can just click that link there. You can also look up the specific URL in Appendix A. So Appendix A of the Facilitator Guide has all of the facilitator tools, including these Digging Deeper resources. So let's just take a moment to turn to page 108 in the Facilitator Guide. That's where you're going to see the Appendix A, the Facilitator resources. So you'll see sort of in the middle of page 108, where it says Introduction, Digging Deeper Resources. It has those same resources listed that are on page 118, or sorry, page 18, but now the full URL is spelled out. So if that's something you want to just type into a browser to look up. Again, these links are clickable as well if you're looking digitally. And you'll see after the introduction, this is where all the Digging Deeper resources for each module live as well. Okay, so let's flip back now to page 18 and 19. We're going to be doing a little bit of flipping back and forth just so everyone knows where all the resources are and what the appendices hold. Okay, so continuing with the background information onto page 19, the background section is where you'll also find the link to download the slide deck for the module. So this PowerPoint emblem here, you see download slide deck here. This is an editable file available for you to adapt as necessary. And we're going to talk about that more throughout today and tomorrow about your ability to adapt as necessary, to include, remove slides, adapt talking points for what's relevant to your producer audience. And just as a reminder, the slide deck files are also individually accessible on the facilitators page of the website. So that might be an easier place to download those as well, but they're also embedded at the beginning of each module like this. And then the beginning of each module also includes that list of case studies that are going to appear in the module. For the introduction, we've included a podcast conversation between a school buyer and a small 2-acre producer, both in California, sharing their perspectives on the importance of building and maintaining relationships when it comes to farm to school. And again, another reminder that the full set of case studies are found online as well. All right, so you're also going to notice that each slide in the facilitator guide has talking points for you. And as we go through these modules today and tomorrow, we're going to be pulling from these talking points, summarizing where necessary. You know, we're not going to be reading these talking points verbatim, but we do really encourage folks to read through each module's talking points before delivering the training. And again, as a reminder, you can make those adjustments that are needed to the slides and the talking points as well when you're adding in your own regionalization and customization for your training. Okay, and just as a note, these training or talking points are really what's been translated into that producer-friendly language in the producer workbook, so that the talking points and the content that's in the producer workbook are, you know, complementing one another as you go through each module. And again, you will also see specific facilitator prompts within the talking points as well. And these are intended to provide additional context and instructions for activities. And then lastly, what you're going to see at the beginning of each module are these key terms. You'll notice as we get into modules 1 through 4, there's a Jeopardy game option to support producers as they learn these new terms. Lacey's going to talk a little bit more about that game when we get to module 1. And a full list of key terms and acronyms from all modules is on page 105 of the facilitator guide and page 62 of the producer workbook. So let's just take a minute to turn to those glossaries. So it's page 105 in the facilitator guide. I'm turning there too. And then page 62 in the producer workbook. So you should notice right away, the glossaries are the same in both resources. This is meant to both be a tool for trainers as well as a resource for producers as they're learning these new terms. So can someone find the definition of whole farm goal setting in the facilitator glossary and come off mute to share that definition? Let's see if folks are having success finding and using the glossary. Whole farm goal setting.
This is Carrie from California. I can read it.
Yay.
Distinct from other farm planning approaches because it ties together all of the planning producers do for the whole farm. This holistic approach is based on the short and long-term vision producers and their families have for themselves and the farm.
Great, thanks, Carrie. All right, so is everybody seeing that definition, page 107? I know we're all pretty familiar with glossaries. Thanks for humoring me. So just know that that resource is there for both the trainer and the producer in both resources. So that's an overview of what you're going to find both at, in the introduction specifically, but generally at the beginning of each module in the facilitator and facilitator guide and producer workbook. So are there any questions before we start going through more of the introduction slides? All righty. Well, feel free to chime in if you think of anything. So let's turn back to page 19 in the facilitator guide. And why not? We'll go back to page 2 in the producer workbook. So you can see on page 19, it's slide 2. This is the very first slide in the introduction after the title slide. It's intended to contextualize the individual local producer training that you're going to be hosting in your state within the broader training program objectives. So the objectives for the training as an entire program are to increase producers' knowledge and understanding of farm to school, increase participation in farm to school activities, and increase the amount of local foods that producers sell to schools. So those are the general objectives for this training, but there will be more specific learning objectives embedded in each module, and we'll take a look at those for the introduction in just a moment. But before we get into content, I wanted to flag slides 3 and 4. So they're at the bottom of page 19. And we're going to hear a lot more about how to conduct evaluations for your trainings on Thursday of this week from NYU. But I did want to point out that when you are hosting your training and you're using the intro slide deck, that slides 3 and 4, which are shown here on the left side of the screen, they're going to prompt you to initiate that pre-training survey process for producers before getting into any content. Okay, so similarly, you're going to be prompted to do a post-training survey during the conclusion of the modules, which we'll see tomorrow. And I also wanted to note that you do have access to additional guidance about the evaluation protocol for in-person trainings, and that's in Appendix D. So that's shown on the right side of the screen here. It's on page 131 of the Facilitator Guide. And you also have an updated evaluation protocol for virtual trainings in your workshop materials folder. So you should have those 2 resources, one in the Facilitator Guide that was intended for in-person trainings and one that's printed and in your workshop folder for virtual trainings. And if you do have any questions about evaluations that are bubbling up, we just ask that you write those down, save them for that session with NYU on Thursday. So they'll be able to answer all of your questions about the evaluation process. All right, so we're following along. We're going to turn to the next page, page 20. We're looking at slide 5. So you're going to see a list of the learning objectives for each module, like I said, and these are the ones for the introduction. So the introduction really aims to support producers in gaining that initial understanding of what farm to school is and how it can benefit them. It's also intended to start identifying their motivations for selling to schools, consider how their overall farm goals that they have align with those motivations and values. And it's also the module in which we introduce the concept of action planning and goal setting as a tool that they can use for meeting their own farm and lifestyle goals through school sales. All right, so the first activity that you're going to be doing with producers is an icebreaker of sorts. And before I dig into this activity, I do want to say, ask folks to take a moment to think of any icebreakers that they've used in trainings, especially with producers that they like, because we're going to be sharing those in just a moment. So start thinking of any icebreakers that you're using or have used in trainings, especially with producers that you'd like to share with other folks on the call. All right, so as you're thinking of those, you can kind of see outlined in the facilitator prompt on page 20 under slide 6. It recommends that you provide producers with an index card to write down their icebreaker answers. So giving them that time to think about their answers on their own first. And then depending on the size of the group, you may be able to have a whole group discussion and share some of the answers or just break into smaller groups. There's a lot of different ways that this could look, but we just want to make sure that producers are connecting with each other early on in the training and beginning to articulate their why, why they're here, why farm to school, is farm to school right for me? And we recommend collecting the index cards and reviewing them when you do have a moment early on in the training, just to make sure you're able to weave in answers to their questions throughout and make sure that you're meeting their expectations and goals as best as you can throughout the training. All right, so if you have any of those go-to icebreakers that you use during trainings, please come off mute and share or add in the chat. We'd like to see those. I'm going to try and open the chat too.
This is Kelly from Nevada. I haven't actually done them with a producer, but I teach at a community college as well. And we do an icebreaker called the best of times and the worst of times. And you can apply it to whatever subject you're teaching. And it's just kind of to get them to discuss what happened that was positive in a previous class and what happened that was negative in a previous class.
Nice. Thank you for sharing, Kelly. I like that idea. I'm also seeing in the chat, Tamika, about using Play-Doh. I'm so curious to know what I want to learn more, what that means.
So I have not, can you hear me fine?
Yes, we can hear you.
We used Play-Doh for our participants, and it's just whatever random thing want to come up with. So the last time we had them create your favorite fruit or vegetable using Play-Doh, and then they had to show it and say why it was their favorite, that kind of thing. And it just gives them something to play with, and just kind of act like a kid for a moment.
I love that idea. Get that sort of tactile, yeah. That's awesome. And I'm seeing some others. What was your favorite lunch at school growing up? Your favorite seasonal non-alcoholic drink? Yeah, thanks for sharing. These are great. And yeah, you know, just to say that the icebreaker we have in here, feel free to use it and feel free to use your own, you know. And yeah, if folks continue to want to share in the chat, that's great too. All right, so the first content area really starts on slide 7 of the facilitator guide. So again, there's a lot of framing and, you know, foundation laying that's happening in the introduction. And it starts for the producer workbook at the top of page 3. So slides 8 through 10 in the facilitator guide, and then that page 3 in the producer workbook, it really begins with defining what the core elements of farm to school are, you know, naming procurement of local food, naming education, naming gardens. And we just want producers to have a general sense about these 3 aspects of farm to school, where they could potentially plug in outside of procurement if they are interested and able. And emphasize really that those benefits of farm to school that we're going to be learning about are really amplified when those 3 elements are working together and reinforcing those impacts. And as described in the talking points at the top of page 21 of the facilitator guide, we also want farmers to know that farm to school is unique in every community, and that the training you've planned has been designed and customized with their specific needs and offerings and products in mind. So looking on slide 9, this is where we, you know, want producers to start thinking about how their own goals may align with selling to schools, and also see that school districts are interested in purchasing and serving local food and school meals for a variety of reasons, some of which include, you know, schools do want to support local farmers and businesses, and they want to increase school meal quality and the overall school meal program participation. They want to increase kids' willingness to try new fruits and vegetables. And so those are just some of the motivations from the school district side that we think are really important to elevate, because it can help producers identify their own motivations for selling to schools and really see schools as partners in that local procurement piece. And then lastly, you have slide 10, which illustrates the ways in which schools may partner with local farms and food businesses, and give producers a sense of the variety of ways that they can engage with schools and those interconnected benefits that may come from that. So for example, you know, participating in a special school event or hosting a taste testing can then result in an increase in sale from other school districts, from families, from community members, etc. And a fuller list of examples are in the talking points for slide 10 on page 21. So at this time, I think we're going to do a poll where we're asking you to share, you know, what are the 3 most common partnerships based on this list that's on page 21, beyond procurement, between schools and farmers that you would want to highlight in your state. And, you know, for any partnerships that you don't see listed, you can add them to the chat as well. So I think we should have, I'm seeing it. Great. So we're just choosing those 3 most common partnerships between schools and farmers that you would want to highlight in your state when you're doing this training. And if you're not seeing something on this list that you do, please add it to the chat. All right, we have about 50% of folks participating, and cafeteria promotion is taking the cake so far. And then we have educational events, farmer in the classroom, local producer highlights in school menus and on school web pages. Great. Looks like a little bit of everything though. Farm tours. Awesome. Yeah, so we're going to be providing opportunities throughout this week during the breakout sessions to continue brainstorming. What are those campaigns and events and partnerships that you want to share about your state when you're putting on these producer trainings. So this is great. Thanks for sharing. All right, I'm trying to get. Here we go. Okay, so the next section of the introduction is really meant to provide an overview of the benefits of farm to school for producers, and also be an opportunity for producers that you're training to hear from those experienced producers in farm to school. And this section includes a couple different regionalization opportunities. So slides 12 and 13, and this is also following at the bottom of page 3 in the producer workbook, it includes a little bit of information about the financial impact and benefits of farm to school for producers, such as an increase in income from farm to school sales, that establishment of long-term revenue streams for individual producers, as well as an increase in market diversification and overall economic growth. And we want to emphasize for producers that selling to schools and participating in farm to school programming may benefit profitability either directly, so through direct increased sales to schools, or indirectly through that diversified marketing strategy. So, marketing that can occur to students and families in the cafeteria and at special events, or farmers advertising about their work with schools at farmers markets or to restaurants. So having those sort of layered and interconnected benefits really highlighted throughout this section. This section also starts to show the ways in which farm to school may align with their farm goals. So thinking about, they may have motivations around feeding kids with local fresh produce, or they may be interested in promoting agriculture as a career pathway for young people. And they may be interested in just increasing that visibility of smaller farms in their communities. So there's a couple items here to sort of get producers thinking about how their business and farm goals may align with farm to school. Now, I've just flagged too that this is also an opportunity to highlight economic impact data on producers selling to schools, as well as farm to school participation data in your state if you have it. So this is continually where that contextualizing those benefits for producers in their locale, in their state or similar locations can be really helpful. And again, we've built in time into our state breakout groups this week to brainstorm this localization piece to make sure that your training is as relevant to your producer audience as it can be. So to that end, this facilitator prompt on page 22 of the facilitator guides, we'll turn the page there. Slides 14 and 16 are intended to be a spot for producers you're training to hear from a producer about their experience in launching or expanding farm to school sales. So this might take the form of a small share out and discussion with a farm to school farmer rock star in your state, or a farmer or current USDA farm to school grantee. You could share a video of a producer sharing their farm to school story. So depending on the context of your state or locale, there's a couple different ways that could look, but we really encourage this peer learning opportunity as much as possible. The quotes that are on these slides, they are real quotes from real farmers, but they're ultimately meant to be those placeholders. And again, in addition to planning a farm to school panel and a site visit, we encourage each state training team to generate a list of producers in your state that may be willing to pop in and share their story with other producers in an informal setting like a discussion or a Q&A, who may just have pre-recorded content to share as well. And so if there are any ideas that are starting to come to mind as we're talking through ways to customize and regionalize the training, we just encourage you to jot those down in your trainer action plan and discuss with your group later today and this week. All right, are there any questions at this point? I'll pause again. like I said, this is a bit of a long module. There's a lot of stage setting. Okay, I'm not hearing or seeing any, so we'll keep moving along. So this is on page 23 of the facilitator guide. This is getting into the second to last section of the introduction. And this introduces the school business action planning guide resource that producers are going to be using throughout the training. So this is a really important component of the introduction. This goal setting and action planning focus is really intended to help producers assess how their lifestyles, their farm landscape, and mission can frame their market selection. And producers will be asked to review their goals and how these relate to school sales during this process. And again, as we heard from the definition read by Carrie, this type of goal setting is referred to as whole farm goal setting. And this concept doesn't need to really be further covered for the purposes of this training, but if you are interested in learning more about whole farm goal setting to prep for your training, you can see some additional resources in that digging deeper resources section that we looked at earlier. So know that that extra info is there, but the basic info you need are in these slides. Okay, so page 4 in the producer workbook, we're going to flip so you can see these images side by side. It aligns with slide 18 in the facilitator guide, which is on page 23. So this begins to walk producers through thinking about their goals, so both on and off the farm, and how they may or may not align with selling to schools. So the diagram shown in both the producer workbook and the facilitator guide illustrates those interconnected variables that really can shape a producer's farm goals as they relate to school sales, including, as I named earlier, lifestyle goals, community assets, marketing and profitability of their farm and business, and their production capabilities. So this is really an introduction to this concept, but at the end of the introduction, producers will spend some time reflecting on these variables and which of them may relate to their goals and motivations for selling to schools. So we encourage trainers to sort of start this conversation at this point by asking producers if they have maybe a business plan in place already, and get them thinking about it from that perspective and how these variables may impact their decision to sell to schools. All right, next you're going to be guiding producers through taking a school business assessment. So this assessment is introduced to producers on pages 4 through 5 in their workbook. And you'll see on page 5 of the producer workbook that the sample assessment is filled out. And so this is also called like a web assessment because it kind of looks like a spider web at the end there, but it's a school business assessment. And at the top of page 5 in the producer workbook is that filled out version for producers to take a look at. So this assessment is part of the school business action planning guide. It's really that first step into introducing how they're going to use the action planning guide. And similar to the trainer action plan that I went over yesterday, this assessment is really intended to help producers identify areas that are going to be important for them to think about and plan for as they move through their training. It's really intended to identify gaps in their skills and resources that they need before selling to schools. So I'm actually going to walk through what filling out this assessment looks like, because it's not always obvious by looking at this sample. So I'm going to, let's see if this works. Okay. Share a new screen. All right, is everybody seeing this web? Blank web, great. So I'm just gonna, again, walk through filling this out, and you can see in the instructions on page 5, as well as in the facilitator guide, that this assessment is categorized by module topics in the producer training curriculum, including goals that are sort of covered in the introduction module that we're going through right now. You have module 1, which is those trial nutrition programs. Module 2, selling to schools, product identification, and growing for schools, covered in modules 3 and 4. And again, these are just written out as I statements to just get that quick assessment for producers at the beginning of the training. And so the scoring is on a scale of 1 to 5, with 1 being little to no skills or resources and 5 indicating strong skills and ample resources. And these instructions are in your facilitator guide on slide 19 again. So if we're looking at this web, and I kind of helped myself out with some of these dots because it was hard to look at before. But basically, if I'm a producer coming in and filling out this web assessment, I might go through and just quickly note that I feel like my goals align with schools, but I don't quite feel comfortable with food purchasing practices specifically. So I'm going to put a 1 down here, but I feel strong about my goals aligning with farm to school. And then if I move into the module 1 content and child nutrition programs, I feel like I have experience selling to wholesale buyers, but I'm less comfortable around connecting with school buyers. And then thinking about selling to schools, I understand vendor requirements for school markets. So I'd mark myself at about a 3 here, but I don't really feel comfortable managing school contracts. So I'm giving myself a 1 there. And then looking at, I understand how products fit in school menus. So I'm feeling kind of medium there. I feel like I have a good sense of what that's probably like, but would like more information. So I'm putting myself there. And then my products can meet school specifications and quantities. I feel comfortable in this. I feel like I usually can meet specs and for other vendors, so other buyers. So we'll put a 4 there. And then I understand my costs of production and can price my products competitively. I feel really comfortable with that. I feel comfortable with the infrastructure that I have in place. I have a pretty solid safety plan, and I'm really confident and have strong production skills. So it's really meant to be, again, like 8 minutes top, sort of bird's eye view and of ranking yourself or themselves on this scale. And then you kind of come through and connect the dots here. And basically it gives you a sense visually of where your gaps are, right? So you can see in the web that I have a lot of skills and knowledge covering the growing for schools, goals, and product identification, but I have a lot more gaps around the child nutrition programs and selling to schools. So I know immediately at the beginning of this training that I'm going to want to focus in on those modules 1 and 2 content. That's really where I need the info and the support. And so it's just intended to give that quick snapshot there. Both for producers, but also as for trainers too, in terms of where to focus content moving forward. All right, so let's see. I'm gonna go back to my PowerPoint. Well, this is so fancy. Okay. So I did want to point folks to where you can actually find this blank assessment. So this is in the producer workbook on page 53. So you can turn there if you'd like, but it's a full page on page 53 of that blank assessment. And so that's where you would guide producers to go there and take that web assessment again. Take about 5 to 8 minutes to do that. And then of course that sample is again on page 52 for producers to look at. So once producers have filled out the assessment, they're really ready to start thinking about their action plan and how to get the most out of their training. Okay, so we're going to move through this last piece here. And this is really what we want producers to leave this training with, is a school business action plan filled out, ready to go to support them in accessing school markets. And the plan is really going to provide producers with those tangible next steps for selling to schools, and it reflects that farm goal-based decision making. So this resource, the action planning guide, and we're already there in the producer workbook, it starts on page 52. So you're going to see throughout the curriculum that we've built in time at the conclusion of each module for producers to fill in their school business action plan in real time. So they're going to be doing this module by module throughout their training. You're going to keep returning to this resource. And it may be useful to provide action plan samples to demonstrate variability among producers related to products, scales, and farm to school experience. But again, this is the tool that we encourage you to encourage producers to continue to come back to throughout the training. All right, so we've already looked at the school business assessment again. That's on pages 52 and 53. So we'll move through that. And then if you turn to page 54, there's a checklist assessing what benefits of farm to school interest producers and what support they need to achieve farm to school related goals. So this checklist aligns with the content on page 21 of the facilitator guide that we talked about a little bit earlier. And at this point, you're going to be introducing the idea of action planning and SMART goals with producers and setting them up to develop this action plan that includes their motivations to participate in farm to school, those long-term and short-term goals for farm to school sales, the value that they can provide schools, as well as those specific action steps for the next 6 to 12 months, in addition to resources, context, any additional info that they need to implement their plan. And at this point, you're going to prompt producers to take about 10 minutes to fill out the questions on page 54 in their workbook. And this is really a culmination of the thinking that they've been doing this whole introduction about those benefits, the motivations, the goals, the sort of why they maybe want to sell to schools. And it may be that producers get to this point in the training after they've done the assessment, they've been thinking about these benefits, motivations, and goals, and they don't think that selling to schools is right for them, or they don't think it's right for right now, and that's totally fine conclusion to come to. Just wanted to name that. But we are sort of operating on this assumption that, you know, the producers in the room, they want to sell to schools and they want to learn more. And so that's sort of the assumption that we're working with right now. So just to recap, at the end of the introduction, producers will have filled out both the school business assessment, so that web assessment we just went over, and the benefits of farm to school checklist, which is shown here. And ideally at that point, producers can move forward with this info. So these identified strengths, gaps, benefits, goals, to help them navigate the training and identify their strategies and goals related to schools. And again, if their conclusion is that this isn't right for me, then that's an okay conclusion to come to as well. And I would just add to, you know, for additional support for preparing this topic, you want to visit those digging deeper into core concept resources on page 18. And we also have a separate how to use action planning recorded training that's accessible on our website as well. And I think I can actually drop this into the chat. Okay. So this is where the introduction content actually ends in the facilitator guide. But I did want to just flag before we get to questions, the other components of the action planning guide, just so that you see all of those pieces together. So you can see just, you know, opposite of page 54, you see these end of module check-ins. Again, these are all the end of module check-ins compiled into one place. This is where you'll be pointing producers to at the end of each module to revisit these check-ins and make sure that they're getting all the info that they need to move through the training. And then if you turn to flip over in producer workbook to page 56, which you can see as a screenshot on the right side of the slide here, that's where the action plan table actually begins. And so you can see it's divided amongst the modules. So module 1 has 1 page, module 2 has 1 page, etc. And this is where you'll be encouraging producers to write in those action steps and any of those additional resources that are needed. And lastly, the very last page of this guide, of this resource for producers, is the tying it all together table. And we're going to go over that in more detail tomorrow in the conclusion. So I won't talk about that too much there, but just know that it's there for now. So that's the full school business action planning guide resource. And I believe Tammy had dropped in the chat, sort of, you can download that as an individual resource as well. So with that, I'm going to pause for any questions that folks may have about the action plan, about the introduction. Yeah. All right. Well, we're going to go into a quick break. I know we're a few minutes over. Do we have a couple minutes for a quick stretch? Maybe come back at okay, I'm getting a thumbs up. Should we do quick 5 minutes? 3? 5 sounds good. Okay, so we'll come back at 1:39 ish Pacific time.
All right, folks, we are at 1:39, so I'm going to go ahead and jump into our first module. Hope everybody got a little snack, got a little movement in, and hope everybody is ready to talk about getting to know your school markets. So this first module, module 1, is really focused on coming back to what producers need to know about school food programs. Again, we really want to underscore the opportunity and the ability to customize based on what producers that you are training, that you are serving need. They may not need all of this information, but it's here and you can identify what are going to be the best tools and approaches for the producers that you're working with. The aim of this first section is to just help producers understand that school buyer, provide them enough information so they can have those conversations, those negotiations. They can come together in a shared language and find mutually beneficial relationships. So we want producers to understand that school perspective enough to have those meaningful conversations in the way they need to. We also want producers to really start to think about, is this the right pathway for me? You know, we need producers to understand those school needs, and so they can start to make those decisions. But are farm to school sales the right sales for them? So to orient everyone to our materials, again, we've got a lot of different materials going on, so make sure you're in the right sections. In our facilitator guide, you'll be on page 25. So your color for section 1 is blue. Keep coming back to these blue sections for module 1. So that'll start on page 25 in your facilitator guide. It'll start on page 6 in your producer workbook. You'll see that module outline there on page 6 to help guide you. And then of course, we've got those producer training slide decks available online. And you'll be seeing the little thumbnails both in your facilitator guide as well as we walk through the module today. So in this module, when implemented in a producer training, it's designed to take about an hour, depending on the number of optional activities you include. So we'll be going through a lot of these optional activities, hopefully making it pretty interactive for you this morning and see those different ways that you can engage producers throughout this module. We've got 3 sections. One is section A, child nutrition programs, the basics. Section B, we'll be talking about local food sourcing and procurement for school meal programs. And then we also have that optional section C, which would add about an extra 20 minutes if you chose to do it. But that's focused on the child and adult care food program and summer food service program. We've heard a lot of interest already in child and adult care food program. So we've got some specific content if that is of interest to the producers that you're working with. So again, a great opportunity to come back to this outline that you'll find on page 25 of your facilitator guide. Moving on to page 26, Jenny Lee did a great job of walking through these content sections that are going to be at the beginning of each of your modules, but that kind of information to help you as a facilitator, information to help you go back to those concepts and dig in if you need to, see those case studies that you could bring in and integrate and share with producers, understand the key terms and some additional facilitator tips to help you through this section as well. So let's dive into the content here. So starting, of course, with the framing around learning objectives, what will producers walk away from in this section? And in this section, our aim is for producers to be able to understand the scope and diversity of child nutrition programs, again, so they can start to see this as a viable opportunity, if it might be for their school markets and for their businesses. We want them to understand how child nutrition programs plan menus, process foods, and prepare meals so they can see how their products might fit into those needs for child nutrition programs. And understand just the basics of those regulations that influence how school foods programs make decisions and how that might influence what school food programs purchase from them and how they have to purchase. So again, the information that they need to start to build those relationships with school buyers. So looking at those objectives, you can see that there is definitely some language that might not be so familiar to producers if they are just learning about school food markets and school food opportunities. So one way that we encourage you to start to familiarize producers with some of this language is through an optional Jeopardy game. So we won't go through the whole Jeopardy game, but we do have guidance within the slide deck on how you can create your own interactive Jeopardy game that can work both in an in-person setting or work online as well. But I do want to share some samples with you of how this might look, and also refresh everyone on how to play Jeopardy in case they have forgotten and they don't play with their Alexa like I do. But we're going to go through and also give you some opportunities to earn some points. You remember yesterday, we did talk a little bit about an opportunity to earn some prizes for your state. So this is going to be one of those opportunities to earn some points for your state. So we're going to play a little mini Jeopardy game. As you might recall, Jeopardy, you do have to answer in the form of a question. So I am going to share some definitions of some of the key terms that you might see in Module 1. And the first person to unmute and color out the correct question, I almost said answer, the correct question will earn a point for their team. So can I see some thumbs up on everyone remembering how to play Jeopardy? All right, got some thumbs up. So for this version, you are unmuting and hollering out. So you have to yell loud because you have to be the first person I hear. Okay, so our first answer is the act of purchasing goods and services. For example, food for a child nutrition.
What is procurement?
All right. Who was that hollering out, and just tell us your state as well?
Cheryl Thornton, Washington State.
Thanks, Cheryl. All right, point for Washington. Okay, how about our next one? A commercial enterprise or nonprofit organization that acts on behalf of a school food authority by managing or directing any aspect of their school meal program.
What is a food service management company?
Yes. All right. Who was that, and what is your state?
Carrie Robinson, California.
Carrie. All right. California. Okay. Let's do one more. I think California might be in the lead, guys. Okay. How about a district level professional who oversees all aspects of the school nutrition program for the district, independently or alongside additional school nutrition professionals. They are directly responsible for the management of the day-to-day operations of school food service.
What is the food service director?
Director.
All right. Who was the first?
That might have been
who
a
did I hear first?
tie. I think Charlene and Youssef.
All right. Got a tie?
Charlene, where are you from?
Hawaii.
All right. Okay. Yeah.
All right.
That will give you a point for California.
All right. Great work, guys. We'll have more points to come. So keep up your Jeopardy skills. Thanks for that. So that's just another way to start thinking about connecting those, have an opportunity to look at the glossary and see some of those resources. And just a way to get folks talking at the beginning of the session too, which is always nice. So let's dig into Section A of child nutrition programs. So we start this section with an opportunity for, again, that state and regional customization. We want to lift up what's happening within child nutrition programs and farm to school in your state, specifically really connecting those local purchasing numbers. And we'll talk a little bit more about that data and the USDA census data, but really want to start strong and emphasizing to producers the market opportunities for child nutrition programs in their state, and start to guide producers in thinking about if this is the right market opportunity for them. So we also have resources here on where you can find that information for your state, and a kind of template slide where you can demonstrate what some of the activities, especially those kind of local purchasing numbers and features that are happening in your state. So following that introduction, we recommend, if you have one available or for your state or region, to start by highlighting some farm to school in action. So I'm going to share a sample video. This is from Maine, so wrong region, I know, but it's just an example about a super brief video that can just show what this work looks like on action, both from the producer side as well as how this kind of lands in schools as well. So let me share my other screen.
Always had in the back of my mind that, building a relationship with a local school could be a really great way to, give back to the community and sell some vegetables at the same time. So I reached out to the nutrition director at Massabesic, and she was very willing to work with me.
I just made a few phone calls, honestly looked at some Google Maps, looked for some local farms, knew what products that I wanted, and just asked around, and everybody was more than accommodating. I think they get the chance to really understand how the food system should work, and they can see that and they can taste the flavor difference, and it's really cool to do that.
Knowing what goes into your food, knowing that it's healthy, knowing that it's fresh is a huge deal. Kids deserve to have that fresh, healthy local food if they can get it.
The farm to school movement in Maine is growing. Get involved. Learn more about your program. Visit getrealmaine.com.
All right, so that's just a little view. You got to see a little bit and hear a little bit from a producer, and also see some of those meals on kiddos' plates, which is important for our next activity that leads right into that. Let me share my slides again here. You guys already predicted what we're going to do next, and that's to ask producers to think about their school food meal memories. So this is just an opportunity to kind of reconnect. What do producers think about school meals, and maybe what kind of misconceptions can we start to correct or rethink? So I'd love to hear from some folks to take a minute, share what are your meals? What meals are you hearing from? Or what are your school food meal memories? Feel free to unmute, or you can type them in the chat box there.
This is Kelly from Nevada. I remember the rubber pizza in the little tin foil.
Pizza.
This is Melina from Oregon. I had an elementary school that we had family style lunches. So we had big bowls that we would pass around and serve ourselves and kind of sit family style. That's what I remember.
Oh, that's great. Thanks for sharing that.
This is Rashid in California. I'm originally from New York, and we had overcooked vegetables out of a can.
Sounds familiar. Fries,
Carmen.
sloppy joes. Carmen, go ahead.
My best memory of food at school was just freshly baked cinnamon rolls. And in talking to a kid recently from a completely unknown to me, this kid, she said that today she wishes that she had the same sort of food that she had when she was a child, when schools actually cooked the food as opposed to dumping it from a can.
Thanks for sharing that, Carmen. So you can see there's some pretty diverse experiences when it comes to school food. A lot of people have these, square pizza. I feel like that's one of the big ones that comes up. Things in different shapes, foods and shapes of food they shouldn't be in. But then it's also great to ask, does that reflect what we saw in those videos? The fresh produce, the home cooked options, the in-school cooked options. And so really emphasizing that, for some folks, school food meals has changed, and maybe it's even coming back to what maybe some producers remember when they were a kid, those meals that were cooked from scratch, smelling those cinnamon rolls baking, having that connection and seeing the food cooked on site, and maybe even having those connections to knowing where it comes from. So really reconnecting and helping producers think about what food can look like in schools today, that it may not be that kind of preconceived notion of prepackaged products. It could be this great fresh product, and that school nutrition producer or providers really want to emphasize, and many do want to prioritize that fresh product and potentially fresh product that they can sell them. So thanks everybody for sharing your memories. It's always fun to hear the different memories from different regions as well. It seems to vary quite a bit. So after we have that opportunity to get producers talking a little bit and sharing, then we get a little more into the nitty-gritty of the school meal programs. Always, again, kind of thinking with that purpose of what do producers need to understand to make the decision if school scales are right to them and connect with the school buyer. So on slide 12, we start to address meal programs by the numbers on the national level. Again, kind of underscoring the market opportunity and thinking about how much funding really is going into and could be going into local foods from school meal programs. Again, you can kind of bring this back to kind of the local or state information and purchasing power as well. Moving into slide 13, we briefly explain who the key players in farm to school are. So, producers are at this USDA designed training presented by many folks from state agencies, but we're kind of supporting them in developing those relationships with school districts or more local level players there. So this is an opportunity to kind of reiterate the different roles, the people they might connect with within those different roles, and how those different roles can support them as a producer. So what are those state agency folks? What are you able to offer to support producers? And then what can they kind of take and how can they connect with those more local level partners? So just helping to orient producers to who some of those key stakeholders they might be connecting with through this process or through sales to schools might be. Next, we start to address these key drivers that determine, sorry, let me make sure I've got my right slide here. So important in this section also is we kind of shift our language. Child nutrition programs is quite a mouthful and may not necessarily resonate with producers. So this is a place, and you can see kind of throughout the next slides, we talk more about school meal programs. And so throughout this training, we do focus more on those school meal programs that are more traditionally in the K through 12 schools. As we mentioned, we've got that kind of supplemental information about CACFP and summer food service program, but just kind of streamline our information and have a focus and not make it too broad. We do focus and have the language around school meal programs. So you'll see that transition in this section and the way we're kind of talking about the programs that we're focusing on. Sorry, guys, I think I was on the wrong slide there. That was probably very confusing. But reorienting a little bit, we are on our facilitator guide, page 31 and 32, and this is going to be slides 14 and 16. And what we're digging into here in this section is really focusing on those key drivers that are going to determine what school meal programs purchase and serve. So thinking about the meal pattern and nutrition requirements and the meal cost. So when we look at those meal components, the aim is for producers to think about how what they are growing, what they're producing can fit into those needs of school meal programs. We heard a little bit yesterday in our panel about how the hot dogs, they kind of helped align better with the nutrition standards than maybe a standard hot dog produced or purchased from another outlet. So we can think about how these nutrition standards and these meal program requirements might help producers hone in on a great product for schools. In other panels that we've heard producers talk about sweet potatoes and how sweet potatoes were a great marketing opportunity because schools were looking for those red, orange vegetable requirements. So honing in on how this can help producers identify those potential market opportunities that they may already be producing. And so after we kind of think about that, it's another opportunity just to pause, give producers a chance to think about what are they already producing? Are they growing sweet potatoes? Are they growing leafy greens to help fulfill that green requirement? Do they have beans or legumes that can help fulfill that bean and legume requirement? So help producers start to think about what they might already be growing that fits into that framework that school food programs are looking for. So moving on again to think about meal cost and reimbursement. And our purpose here is to provide a realistic view of what school meal programs are working with, but also dispel myths that schools can't afford to purchase local. We want to demonstrate that that volume of meals served creates opportunity for potential high dollar sales, and that there is a lot of spending from that school meal side. And also that schools have autonomy in making those decisions about how they utilize their purchasing and where they use their funds. So again, this is an opportunity. We have these numbers based on national level data, but we encourage you to customize and share the information based on your state and your region. So next we start to think about the diversity of school meal programs and the different sizes, the different scales, the different capacities that are all going to impact what a school program can purchase and is interested in purchasing. So here we see a chart that kind of talks a little bit about what maybe a different size school might want to purchase based on how they're using the product. So broccoli, for instance, it's going to depend on how many students are being served, what those ages of students, whether they are including it in a plated meal or whether they are including it on the salad bar. So we just want to demonstrate that there are different volumes and the capacity, the production capacity of producers might align better with one type of program than another, but demonstrating that there are diversity and options out there. We also want to emphasize potentially the difference in production as well. What is the school meal program kitchen capacity? We talked a little bit yesterday, right, about how some schools might have the facilities and the resources to break down a half of an animal, whereas some are really hardly maybe doing much from scratch and may need to focus a little bit more on products that are prepared or products that can be served with minimal prep or production. So that information about what a school program kitchen looks like will also inform the needs and what they could purchase as well. So I'm going to share another video briefly that I really like because it kind of gives that insight on what a school kitchen might look like. Again, if you have kitchen tours, if there's someone in your state who'd be willing to do a quick tour of their kitchen and share what that production looks like, this is a great opportunity to feature kind of that diversity of capacities and what it might look like in your area too. All right, share screen again here, go into video mode.
You're helping build that sense of community and people can have trust in what you're serving.
Well, when we first found out that collards were going to be available through the Farm to School program, thought back to my childhood, and every time my mom cooked collards, it was in the biggest pot that we had in the house. So I looked in the back of our cook chill department. I said, there's 2 huge pots. I bet we could cook collards in those. It was a little trial and error at first, getting the seasoning right. And of course, the staff was a little wary at first. But if there's one constant, it's going to be change. We're going to be challenged and required to do new things. And that's a good thing because we are creating change in our children's dietary habits and improving them. So if we expect our kids to improve, then we've got to do the same.
Very good. They look good. Very good, Sharita. Ready to go.
think that by creating demand, we can also help stimulate the supply. That's one of the largest barriers that we have, is strictly being able to get the supply at the level that we would use.
1 case of sweet peas, 1 case, 3 cans of mixed fruit, 4 bags of pears. Sadler.
What's unique about us is we do deliver groceries and supplies to every school every day.
4 bags of collard greens.
That's about 22,000 lunches and close to 9,000 breakfasts a day.
2 cucumbers.
All right, so I like the music in that, but I also like that it shows really this kind of scale of production, and it also starts to give some insight into the different models as well. You know, we see a central kitchen model, and we can have the opportunity to share with producers what those different models on site, central kitchen, if they're food service management companies, and talk about how that might connect to who they talk to and who they would need to make relationships with. All right, let's get back to our slide deck here. So that starts to wrap up our section A on kind of the basics of our school meal programs. And that brings us to another applied activity, which I hope you guys are excited as I am to be seeing this new USDA farm to school census data. And we have an opportunity to explore this USDA farm to school census data in the context of helping producers understand what that purchasing environment looks like in their state or in their locale. What are school food service programs purchasing already? What are the products that they are prioritizing for local purchase? How much money are they spending on that local level? So I will, actually, I'll share my screen again so we can take a look at it. I don't know how many folks have had a chance to dig in. And I will say we may do a little revamping of the worksheet that we've developed, because the worksheet was based a little bit more on kind of walking through the steps in the previous data iteration. But now that we have new data, we may reframe that a little bit to make it a little more accessible and in line with the information, how it's presented on the new website. But one thing I think is really exciting about this new website is being able to dig into that district and that local level data. So just for reference, if you are looking at your facilitator guide, page 36, that is where the prompt and the directions as a facilitator for this activity are. And then if you look at your producer workbook on page 10, that is where the guidance and the worksheet for producers are. So I am going to, if everybody could navigate, we're going to add to the chat box the link to this brand new beautiful data. I'd love to give another chance for another point. The question I'd like folks to take a look at is coming back to the school district data. So we won't focus on state right now. We heard some great state data yesterday, but we're going to look at that school district data. So I will share my screen actually and show folks a little bit how to navigate. And then we'll ask folks, the first person to put in the chat box after I'm done asking the question will get a point for their team. But I want to show this new data here. So one of my favorite things here is if we explore the results, we can scroll down to look at state level information, but also find nearby school food authorities or school districts and can look for the name itself. Or I think this is so cool to be able to search within a zip code or to look at your regional area. So I would love to give a point to the first person to list their local school food authority and how much of their total food purchase was spent on local foods, including local milk. So if you're able to navigate to that census page, you can just go to census results and then scroll down the page a little bit. You can search for your school food authority, or you can search in your zip code area. So let's say we search my zip code area, I can look for
Hawaii State Department of Education.
all right. And what was the
250,000 on local foods, including milk.
great point for Hawaii? All right. So this is just a nice way. And, again, you can navigate producers through it, or you can provide them the resources for them to explore themselves. And I think we may continue to see new information coming out through the survey. So we'll help keep that updated and share with you if we get a kind of a refined worksheet based on this new data too. So that brings us to section B, focusing on local food sourcing and procurement in school meal programs. To get everybody back oriented, you'll find this section starting on page 37 of your facilitator guide. And so again, coming back to our goal with this section is to provide producers enough information to be able to understand, have those discussions with the school food buyer, and make the decisions about the pathways that are best for them for selling to schools. So we start with this look at the farm to school supply chain to help producers understand who these key players are from getting food from producers to schools, and who they might be working with in those kind of intermediary pathways. So on slides 28 through 30, again, we see a lot of great regionalization opportunities to highlight here. And we dig into what serving local food in schools looks like. And we heard a little bit about this introduction, but really returning to and elevating these different ways that local foods can be incorporated into school meal programs and into schools in other ways as well. So we start by defining local, talking about why that might matter in purchasing decisions for school food programs. We look at how schools source local food, which again is a great opportunity to highlight distributors, processors, retailers in your area that might be key players in that process. And then we touch on how schools incorporate local foods, including and beyond our kind of standard ideas of meals and the school lunch program. So again, another great opportunity to regionalize, talk about the different programs, whether that's State Plate or Harvest of the Month, or those different opportunities to connect producers and schools. And it's a great opportunity to highlight producers, have producers share those stories about how they've cultivated those relationships with schools. We also want to give producers a general idea about timeline in working with schools. We heard yesterday on our panel, it's very different than working with a restaurant, right? These menu plans, they're going out months and even a year in advance. And those contracts might need to be in place a year in advance. And so giving producers an idea of when they can start to develop those relationships, what they can expect in that timeline and relationship development for things to move and when their product will be needed. So you can customize this based on what happens within your region or area, but this is just kind of a general timeline to help producers understand what that might look like in building relationships. So our next potential applied activity here comes back to some of these amazing case studies that we've talked to producers and shared their stories of connecting with schools. So in the producer workbook, on pages 12 and 13, you'll find mini case studies. So these are kind of abbreviated case studies. You'll find the full case studies on the website on that case study page. But these case studies, the aim is really to highlight these different relationships between producers and school food service buyers. And it really aims the worksheet that goes along with it helps to draw out some of these questions about what is it about the relationship that is beneficial for the producer or works well for the producer and is mutually beneficial for both parties. So we encourage if you have time, you can have producers work in tables to read and then discuss. This is a great opportunity to just kind of see some of this in action and relate what it might really look like for a producer to develop those relationships. So coming out of that activity, we dive into our last topical area around School Food Procurement 101. And again, we go into a lot of depth on what the procurement process looks like for the producer side in Module 2. We'll hear from this afternoon a little bit, but this is that very high level overview to kind of understand what those steps in the process might look like and how it might look from the producer side. So here we cover the basics around the procurement standards that school buyers adhere to and how those might impact their purchasing decisions, how that might impact the producer. Understanding the use of geographic preference and what that means for a local producer. Looking at procurement methods, again, very high level, just to understand kind of those different thresholds and how that might impact the procurement process. Again, another opportunity for making sure that that is specific to your state or locale. We've included the federal thresholds, but again, want to make sure that that is specific to the producers you're working with. And then a high level overview of that procurement process. What does it look like to respond to solicitation? Where might they see it advertised? What does that contract relationship look like? And then how do they work with the food service as they're managing that contract? So that brings us to the last section to wrap things up. And all right, if you all are ready, we are going to start this wrap up and conclusion with another opportunity for points. So I think we'll do this one in the chat box. So we want to see the answer. This is a true false game. So you have a 50-50 chance. So we want to see your answer as well as your state to see. Kelly got it first. All right. False, false, false. So true, false. Our first question is, I am not a fruit and vegetable producer. I cannot sell my products to child nutrition programs. That is, in fact, false. We local foods can span the plate from fruits and vegetables to meat, milk, dairy, and grains. All right, so get your keyboards. So Kelly got that one. Get your keyboards ready here. Our next question is, the only way to get my products to children is through school lunch. All right, I think Amy was first on it. I think Amy from Oregon got it in first. That also is false. There are a wide variety of child nutrition programs that we talk about throughout this section, as well as different specialized opportunities, whether that's snacks, taste tests, special events, harvest of the month, or state plate opportunities. All right, everybody ready? Schools might be particularly interested in the sweet potatoes I grow because they are required to serve red orange vegetables. Oh, I didn't see who had it first. Who had it first?
Melina.
Melina. All right. Point for Melina. It is true. Schools are required to serve a certain amount of red and orange vegetables. Okay, I think we have two more here. There is no way that schools can afford to purchase my products with their spending limitations. Okay, who had that one?
I think it was Texas.
Texas? All right, point for Texas. False.
They came so fast, I could hardly.
I know. You guys are doing great. All right, so that is false. Although the reimbursement rates for school meals may be limited, school food authorities have flexibility. All right, I believe this is our last one. Different school food authorities and different child nutrition programs require different volumes of products.
I believe Washington.
Okay.
True, yes.
All right. Tammy's our scorekeeper, so her decision goes. All right, Washington. That is true. The size and type of programs, ages of children served, and modes of serving all influence. Awesome job, guys. So that's really, the target is to kind of dispel some of those myths, bring back up some of those topics that you've covered, and make sure some of those kind of core concepts really stick with producers as they leave this section. Oh, we have one more. The United States Department of Agriculture dictates food safety requirements for schools. I think it was Lydia with Hawaii. False. Food safety requirements are established at the state or food service authority level. And we'll be talking much more about that in module 4. So after that kind of recap, then there's opportunity for some additional questions for reflection to help producers reflect on what they have covered and how they are currently producing and how that affects how their opportunities and how this might fit into the work that they're already doing. And then we come back to this action planning check-in that Jenny Lee covered a little bit, and will bring us back to the opportunity to do that kind of action planning and think about that longer term action planning and how this is one step in building their broader action plan. So we encourage you to spend plenty of time for producers to return to those action planning questions and start to build their action plan. And just as we wrap up this section, just want to mention again that optional content and make sure you know where to find that. All of that optional content, the Child and Adult Care Food Program and Summer Food Service Program information is actually in your appendix. So that's going to be on your Appendix C. That's in page 117. So if that, and again, the slides, of course, are also online. And the facilitator guide information is in the appendix. So just wanted to make sure you knew where to navigate that, since it sounds like there's a lot of people interested in the Child and Adult Care Food Program. All right, so that is module 1. Oh, looks like Tammy's regulating the points. Thanks, Tammy.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't quite see. People were going so fast. So yeah, we'll add a point to those folks too.
You guys were on it. So before we go into our breakout rooms, any questions around module 1 or anything we've covered so far this morning? All right, well, hopefully you'll take some time to reflect as well. We know this is a lot to throw at you. So as questions come up, please feel free to continue to ask them. But we're now going to do some breakout time, go into our state breakout groups. And as you've heard throughout the day, there are so many opportunities to bring customization, regionalization, localization to this training program. And so we're going to spend the next 15 minutes in our breakout groups really talking about and identifying those different opportunities and stories, case studies, local features to highlight in our local or regional training. So we've got 2 Jamboards dedicated to this conversation activity. The first one, Jamboard 6, you're going to be focusing on what are those local stories? What are the case studies you want to lift up? Who are the producers who you really want to feature and invite them to share their work? Who are the school food service folks who you want to lift up and really kind of help ask them to be sharing their story as well? And then on that second Jamboard, Jamboard 7 is the place to talk about what are the programs or policies in your state that you want to make sure that producers know about that are facilitating local purchasing. So maybe that's your local incentive program. Maybe it's a harvest of the month or a state plate feature that producers might be able to tap into and capitalize on. So we've got 15 minutes in our groups, and I think Carlos is going to break us out now.
Again, my name's Tammy, and I'm going to be talking today about Module 2 and selling to school markets. So if you want to follow along, you can through the Facilitator guide. You can turn to page 46, and you'll see that that outline in very small print. And then page 17 on the producer workbook. And then I'm gonna actually have you move on over to page 13, which gives you this higher level overview of the curriculum map, or what we're calling curriculum outlines of the selling to school markets piece. And this map, you can use to, make notes on, like Lacey had suggested, and just really get yourself acquainted with all of the pieces of module 2, selling to school markets. And that is on page 13 of your facilitator guide. And you can see right here, you have the learning objectives and the content and core concepts that will be discussed in the 2 sections of this module, sections A and B, as well as just this high-level overview of the training activities and some of the case studies that we have for the module 2, selling to school markets. So some of those core concepts that we want folks to be focusing on are just, this is all about supply chains and marketing channels, and those different channels for producers to get into their products into schools, and also some very basic pieces and considerations of food safety as it relates to school solicitations. Also related to school solicitations, product standards, and the procurement process and different vendor requirements that might be outlined in those solicitations, as well as some of the food service roles in that solicitation process. And if you turn back to page 47 of your facilitator guide, you can see some of those digging deeper concepts that you might want to utilize in preparation for teaching module 2. And right along with digging deeper are those case studies that we keep asking you folks to look at and check out, and also considering case studies of your own for your own for your own state. So here are some key terms in module 2, and as you can see, there are a lot of them for this particular module, and we're going to get an opportunity to understand those terms in our Jeopardy game in a few moments. So we'll be coming back to those. So facilitators start out by showing producers what they hope they're going to, what they want producers to get out of module 2. And they closely match those core concepts that we just talked about a few slides back. We want producers to identify the best marketing channels that might work for them when they're trying to sell their products to schools based on their capacity and their goals. And then we want them to understand what a solicitation is and how to respond to that. And that includes those vendor requirements and quality standards that will be outlined in that solicitation. And finally, we would like for producers to have some communication tools in working with buyers. So we'll show you how that happens in the next few sections. So this first section, section A, is all about those different pathways or marketing channels that farmers can use to sell to schools. And we estimate that this section might take about 45 minutes if you're including all the activities. So as with module 1, this Jeopardy game is a great way to help producers and trainers get to know the lingo related to school markets and school sales. And of course, this is an entirely optional activity, and it really just depends on the amount of time you have. But if you want to do this activity, you're just gonna have to come up with those questions, but it's pretty easy because it's based on the glossary And we've found that this particular module has had several issues with shared languages between producers and folks working in the procurement end. So it might be particularly useful to do this activity for module 2. So let's try our hand at it today. So if you turn to page 105 of your facilitator guide, and just like in module 1, the first person to unmute and ask the question for the answer that I present will earn a point for their state team. But I'm going to up the ante a little bit here, and I'm going to do similar to Jeopardy in for each $100 you see, you'll get 1 point for your team. So let's go marketing channels for 100. A business that aggregates products for distribution of food at a local or regional scale.
Collective purchasing.
What is a food hub?
Correct, Cheryl. So you're in Washington, right?
Yes, I am.
Okay. So Cheryl earned a 1 point for Washington. All right, let's up the ante here. School buyers for 400 or 4 points for your team. So these are utilized when school districts participate in state or regional purchasing cooperatives and buying groups in order to help school districts obtain.
What is collective purchasing?
That's correct. Who is that?
Charlene from Hawaii.
Okay, Charlene, you got that one. Great. So 4 points for Hawaii. All right. Woo. Okay, so quality standards for 300 or 3 points for your team. The stage of crop production immediately following harvest, including harvesting, pre-cooling, cleaning, and disinfecting.
What is post-harvest handling practices?
That's correct. And who is that?
It's Carrie from California.
All right, Carrie, earned 3 points for California. Okay, last opportunity here. Vendor requirements for 200 or 2 points for your team. A voluntary audit that verifies that fruits and vegetables are produced, packed, handled, and stored.
Good agricultural practices.
That's right. And that's Maya, right?
Yep.
Okay, what state are you in, Maya?
Oregon.
Oregon, 2 points for Oregon. All right. Great, so that was fun. Okay, so we'll start launching into section A. And section A, as I mentioned, is all about helping producers understand the different pathways that products take to get to schools and helping them figure out which pathway or channel would be the best for their product and fit with their farm. So this handy graphic is on slide 6 in the slide deck for you folks to use when you're teaching producers. And it helps explain those different pathways. This is also in the producer workbook on page 18. So we just want you to kind of set the stage of these different pathways, and then we'll go into more detail in the following slides. So slide 7 in your presentation explains the different forms of intermediated market channels that producers may consider when getting their product into schools. And so slides 8 through 10 spend some time on each channel listed in slide 7 here. And as many of you know, an intermediate, sorry, my tongue gets a little tied with that one. The intermediate market channel is essentially one step removed from the producers and oftentimes allows producers to maintain their brand identity. And they're considered what we call a value chain distributor, because part of their marketing strategy is to market local and regional products and see the value in those marketing options. So just like all of the modules, this module has a few embedded videos. And this particular video that I'm going to share with you is about a food hub based in Vermont. And I did see Rashid mentioning that maybe the folks in California need to start upping their video game. But we do have some videos to share from California too. So we're going to bring up this I'm going to bring up this video on another tab here and stop sharing so I can.
Of producers that we work with. Those producers are primarily within a 50-mile radius of us here in Brattleboro, but the more time goes on, the more that we're able to bring in some producers and some special products from a little bit farther afield. So we have this roster of producers, and we list on a weekly basis, twice weekly. We offer their products to our customers through a web portal, an e-commerce site, essentially. When they do order from us through the website or any other way that we then enter into our web platform, that delivery is made as a unit on a set delivery day, up to twice a week right now, and the customer is invoiced for that order as a unit. So no matter how many producers they're buying from at once, they're getting one invoice. We technically do take ownership of the product, but a lot of the product that we sell on what we call a just-in-time basis. We have an order cycle, customers place their orders, we cut it off, and we assemble our purchase orders for farms in our area. We send out those purchase orders to farms, and they pick, wash, and pack to order on a one-day turnaround, typically 1 to 2 days. And then we deliver that freshly picked, freshly packed product straight to the customer. When it comes to produce to schools, almost all of that is still picked up straight from the farm, delivered the next day. And that's something that we take a lot of pride in being able to do. And I think our customers really value knowing that when they're ordering from the farm, they know it's just down the road. They know they're not getting something that's been stored for days or weeks. They're getting something straight from the farm.
All right, so let me get back to my slideshow here. All right, so as you can see, the folks from the Food Hub featured from Vermont, Food Connects, they're really describing that value chain that I just mentioned, but you might have a food hub that you might want to feature within your own state or region. And so there is an opportunity for you folks to find those food hubs within your region. And this activity, we encourage you to do with the producers you're working with. And that way they'll be able to learn if there are some opportunities to sell to food hubs in their area, so that they can assess whether this is a viable marketing channel for them to consider. And another thing to consider is actually having a regional food hub representative present for this particular activity. And you can plan to spend about 5-10 minutes max for folks to identify some of the food hubs in their region. And if the one thing I do want to point out with this, though, is that the agriculture marketing services is actually like a self-directed database for folks to upload their food hub information. And so some of the information isn't quite up to date, we found, as we've been doing this activity, so that there might be food hubs that have changed hands or are no longer available. So it might be good for you to kind of identify some of those resources ahead of time so you can be prepared for that. So slides 11 through 13 wrap up the different market channels for school sales. And Facilitators here is another really great opportunity to identify some regional distributors in your state that sell to schools. And you can engage producers to brainstorm the distributors they already work with that might be selling to schools. This is also a really great opportunity to encourage producers to watch one of those case study videos. We have one titled Growing Farm to School, Partnering with a Distributor. So that might be a really great one to refer folks to in a producer spotlight. And also, I just want to point out slide 13 is where we start to focus a little bit more on national wholesale distributors. And if you want to explain that these are good channels, if a producer already has a lot of experience with wholesale production already. So we're talking like broadline distributors, food service management companies, and that those USDA food distribution programs such as like DoD Fresh and USDA Foods, but these types of channels need to be prefaced with the fact that they are typically require strict grading standards and food safety requirements, as well as many will require actually having GAP certification. So just important things for you to point out to your producers. So slides 14 through 17 provide just a high-level overview of direct-to-school supply chains, along with some considerations for selling direct to school. And we'll be talking in more detail about direct to school in section B. But this would be a good time to ask producers what they think a direct to school sale would look like, and point out that direct to school sales can take the shape of many different types of marketing relationships, not just that traditional form of a procurement contract, but there's other ways such as farmers markets, community supported agriculture, and then that collective purchasing. So there's plenty of opportunities to go into detail about that. And then we just want you folks to, talk about some of the potential pros and cons of the direct to school sales, and just, go through these slides 18 through 19 to talk about, what those benefits are versus some of the drawbacks of doing direct to school sales. And so the takeaway from section A is that the producer gets to choose the best marketing channel for their operation to access school markets. And this worksheet that is on page 25, if you wanted to turn to look at it in the producer workbook, It helps producers think through the pros and cons presented in this section and apply it to their farm. And, we'd like you to encourage producers to consider the channels that work best for their operation. It might be some kind of intermediated channel. Maybe they have a ton of wholesale experience. Maybe they already are selling directly to a broadline distributor or larger wholesale distributor, and they might be ready to move into the direct to school realm. But this gives, as you can see, if you're looking on page 25, a list of different criteria and a rating system for folks to go through to at the end of the worksheet have a better idea of how they're going to start selling to schools and what channel is best for them. So after the market channel assessment wraps up, it pretty much wraps up section A of this module. And then we'll now turn to selling to school districts, which can take a little bit of time because we actually have a solicitation packet in the producer workbook that can take a little bit of time to go through, but up to 60 minutes for you to consider in this section B, selling to school districts. So on slides 22 through 24, you can look at them in pages 55 through 56 of the Facilitator Guide. You're really helping producers understand what's a school solicitation and what does that mean, and how can you help producers understand what is in a solicitation. And this is another really great opportunity for regionalization, because you can look for a solicitation in your region that might, or even in a local school district, and try to use that as an opportunity to bring and make copies for the producers you're working with and show them and go through that with them. But we have a sample one in the producer workbook in the solicitation packet. And so if you turn to page 65 of the producer workbook, you'll see the solicitation packet that we've developed. And it is an appendices, mainly because it is very long, as you can see. And if you're looking at the online version of this solicitation packet, you can also access some solicitations from the Minneapolis School District, which is very much more rural than the Durango School District, which we have enclosed in here, which is a rural sort of mid-scale town in southwestern Colorado. So for most activities in this particular section, you're going to be referring to this solicitation packet. And it's going to help show producers those actual solicitations, but we have lots of worksheets for folks to go through with your producers. And so I think this first activity is best spent just exploring the solicitation, pointing out different aspects of the solicitation. And again, just consider using a solicitation from your region. And this shouldn't take too long, but you might want to, ask people to look at specific aspects and point out different things from the solicitation. And then we start to bring it back into some of those things that were in the solicitation and start explaining them. So slides 26 through 27, we're talking about different vendor requirements that might be included in a solicitation, post-harvest handling, different kinds of food safety, practices that they might require, as well as insurance and different kinds of distribution logistics, like the timing of delivering, all that kind of stuff. So that's something you'll want to point out, as well as bringing it together and just helping producers by thinking about how you can respond to those, and thinking about how you how producers would be adding value as a local vendor. So how to differentiate themselves. And so on page 106 of the producer workbook, that's how long these solicitations are. So they go all the way to our first worksheet here on page 106. And this is a great activity that producers can apply some of their understanding as you start to work through the solicitations and the vendor requirements and those product specifications. And, you know, we would want want producers to understand, you know, how do they know if they're ready to meet with a school nutrition director? So that this check sheet is a really great, or this evaluation is a really great piece for producers to work on for that piece. So you can have producers work together in groups for this particular applied activity, or you can just have them work individually and, you know, spend 5 minutes or so for them to, 5 to 10 minutes for them to go through the questions that are prompted in worksheet 2B. And then back to slides 29 through 31, you want to describe how to introduce and build relationships with school nutrition directors, as we heard yesterday from Kyle and our panel. They, you know, those relationships were pretty important to helping them make the sale. So slide 31 has producers think about that checklist. You know, once you kind of go through how to build those relationships, you have producers turn to page 112 of the solicitation packet and go through that checklist. Are they ready to have the meeting with the school nutrition director? And what are a few tips that producers might use to work together more efficiently? You know, point that out, and I'd like for some folks to just unmute themselves or put it in the chat about what some tips are for working together efficiently with a school nutrition director.
This is Amy in Oregon, and I would say, you know, nomenclature, understanding the terms is probably one of the biggest barriers to getting producers and food service buyers to start talking to each other. So I think, you know, kind of going over some of those terms and what they mean with a producer before they do a cold call or give a call to a food service director can be really helpful. That's one of the things that we often encourage them to do, you know, before they start that initial dialogue.
Great. Yeah, that's a great suggestion. And any other suggestions? Thanks, Amy. I see Charlene says communicate often and provide lots of information to the school food service directors. Ray, relationship building. Yes. That's great. All right.
This is Carrie from California. I would say one of the others, and that we find especially true, is that the food service directors and all of their teams, they're stretched extraordinarily thin. So recognizing that timing and being prepared so that you can have a productive meeting is something that I think is really crucial to them, to just making it as easy as possible for both sides. So being prepared and as you said, the nomenclature, all of that, kind of having that ready to go when you meet is important, because if it takes too much time, it may not be the best avenue for the school.
Yeah, that's great. All really great suggestions. And I would encourage you folks, when you're doing producer trainings, facilitate a similar discussion and ask producers what they think they need to do to come to prepared to a meeting with the school nutrition director, and then facilitate a dialogue really similar to this. So yeah, thanks for all the really great suggestions. And then finally, as a way to wrap up this section on, the direct to school market access, is doing a real, a meeting between, we recommend, getting small groups together and break producers into either enterprise specific, region specific, those types of breakout groups. And then they can go through, if you look on your producer workbook, switching back to page 24, there's a series of questions there that producers can ask each other. And it will really help tease out, are we ready for this? And, some of those questions are, how much time is it going to take if I am going to sell direct to schools? Is it going to require additional equipment? What are my investment costs and all those? And thinking about those questions will really help set up some of the additional modules that we'll be going through in modules 3 and 4. So it's a good way to wrap up and have producers talking with each other. So as we wrap up, we want you folks to access lots of the different case studies that we have, and consider your own videos and to feature in like a producer spotlight type of situation. And then going back to that, checking in through that action planning piece where, did producers meet those goals that we talked about in, the second or third slide? And if not, what do they need to do to get more information or move further along in their school sales, in their action plan? So, and then finally, I mentioned plenty of opportunities for regionalization here, and your state training teams will continue to have the opportunity to change those slides and make them more look like more of the folks that you're working with, as well as changing some of those worksheets and solicitations. So and then also just consider, some of the producers that you work with and having them help in this piece, and maybe helping with that solicitation piece. So another opportunity is like bringing up a school district website and show how to locate a formal solicitation, or bring up a public solicitation through some kind of host site such as Market Maker, if you have something like that in your state. And then another thing that would be important in those pieces when we're talking about vendor requirements are there state level requirements for vendors selling to school districts. These most commonly include things like food safety certification. There can be state level requirements, or is there some type of vendor registration system that needs to happen? And then, indicate any local programs that support marketing or any kind of local marketing event opportunities, such as opportunities to meet school nutrition directors. This might be a really great opportunity to do that. In some of the other states we've been working with, that is one of the hooks they've been talking about in terms of getting producers to a training, is to actually invite some school nutrition authorities to attend and do a meet and greet after the training. So some ideas there for you folks to think about regionalization opportunities. And with that, I would love to take some questions or comments or anything. Oh, and Patricia had a suggestion of doing some kind of roundtable discussion where both parties share their goals and find common ground and buy-in. That's a really great idea. And oh, these are also some of the suggestions about being prepared. Charlene had mentioned communicating often and providing lots of information for school food service directors. All great suggestions. Any questions? All right, folks. Hope you were able to get a little snack and do what you needed to do. Get a glass of water. So our next breakout group, we're going to be talking about, thinking about building that training team. Who are the partners that you have in the room, the virtual breakout room? And then who are the folks that need to be kind of at the table to make a successful producer training? So we're going back to that action planning piece. And you'll see in your Jamboard, there will be, kind of an assessment of your training team and where that's at. And then if you go to Jamboard 9, there are action steps, timelines, and resources to brainstorm with your group about who else needs to be at the table, what do you need to do to get them there, and what's your deadline. So, and then finally, thinking about some of that localization that we talked about and the case studies and regionalization that we've been talking about all day, applying some of those ideas to your Jamboard. So with that, we will have Carlos whisk us away into our breakout rooms, and we'll see you in about 25 minutes. We'll see you all back here.
Welcome back, folks. Hopefully everyone had a productive session with their state teams. As we conclude for the day, I'd love to just get a sense of some of the enthusiasm or ideas that are kind of coming from your group. So if you would, could we maybe just take the next moment to just hear from you all, a program, an event, a policy, or maybe a producer story that should be lifted up within your state. So I won't call on you by state, but if you would be willing to just volunteer and just share, what's going on in your state teams, that'd be great.
I'll jump in and go from Hawaii.
Great, thank you.
I think that this training has given the Hawaii crew that's here an opportunity to get to know each other. All located on different islands, we rarely see each other, especially in the last 2 years. And so I think that just the relationships building that's happened, and then a chance to share information about where our state is at in terms of local food purchasing has been really useful. And just huge thank yous to you guys for helping us come together. I don't know why it takes somebody from the, I don't even know where you guys are, so far away. And now all of a sudden, we're like, yes, let's go. Thank you.
Oh, you're totally welcome. Thank you.
I could share for the California folks. I think one of the takeaways I had is that there are a lot of organizations and a lot of resources out there in California, thankfully. I think we're, blessed in a lot of ways for that. But just there's still some issues just aligning things and really, I think just echoing what the folks from Hawaii said, just getting folks in the same room and just starting to think about these things in groups has been really beneficial.
Thank you, Yusuf. Any others?
This is Kelly from Nevada. I would just say that I'm getting lots of resources and different, places to find new things. I've mentioned, I'm fairly new to this, so yeah, I'm just getting lots of resources, and I really appreciate the time and the opportunity to partake in this.
So good to hear. Thank you, Kelly. Alrighty. Well, thanks so much for sharing. And yeah, tomorrow we'll continue to build on the module learning with deep dives into modules 3 and 4, and of course, some more time to work with your state team. So please join us again tomorrow and have a good evening. Thank you so much.